You know what they say about karma? Sometimes she doesn't arrive quietly. Sometimes she shows up holding a paper bag of sushi and your entire marriage inside it. My name is Natalie Harper, and for 15 years I believed I knew my husband, Jason Harper. I believed in the version of him who kissed my forehead before work, who complained about traffic, who promised that everything we were building together mattered. Turns out, I knew nothing. It was a Tuesday night in November, the kind that feels ordinary enough to lull you into trust. I was finishing my third food delivery shift that week, the steering wheel cold beneath my palms, exhaustion pressing into my shoulders. I wasn't doing it for fun. I was doing it because Jason's career growth phase apparently came with new expenses that his income didn't quite cover anymore. The notification chimed. Order ready for pickup. Sakura Sushi. I almost ignored the address. Almost. Then I saw it. 1247 Riverside Drive, Unit 12A. I knew that address. Everyone did. It belonged to Lena Moore, a polished, ambitious real estate broker Jason had introduced to me months ago as a networking contact. The kind of woman who wore confidence like perfume and never forgot to mention square footage or market value. My stomach tightened. Here's the thing about being a woman who spent years holding a household together. You develop instincts sharper than logic. When your husband says he's flying out for a 3-day conference, but his favorite spicy tuna rolls are headed to a luxury condo 10 minutes from your own home, something inside you goes very still. The universe has a cruel sense of humor. It made me the delivery driver for my own betrayal. The drive took 12 minutes. 12 minutes of rehearsing calm. 12 minutes of telling myself not to jump to conclusions. 12 minutes of preparing to see something that, deep down, I already knew. I told myself I'd be professional, just a woman doing her job. That plan lasted exactly 30 seconds. When the door to Unit 12A opened, Jason stood there, barefoot, breath caught mid-step, wearing a shirt that definitely wasn't his. And behind him, in the soft glow of someone else's apartment, stood the truth I'd been avoiding. In that moment, with a bag of sushi in my hands and my marriage unraveling at my feet, I realized something terrifyingly clear. Some deliveries don't come with receipts. They come with consequences. Before that Tuesday night, before the sushi and the silence and the way my heart seemed to fold in on itself, my life looked solid, ordinary in the best way, predictable, safe. I was 37 years old, a project coordinator for a mid-sized construction firm. Not glamorous, but steady. I liked knowing how things fit together. Timelines, budgets, people. I liked finishing what I started. Jason used to say that was what he loved most about me, that I was reliable in a world that wasn't. We met 15 years ago at a friend's backyard barbecue. I remember it clearly because he spilled beer on my shoes and apologized like he'd committed a felony. He was charming in an unpolished way, warm, funny, the kind of man who listened when you spoke, not because he was calculating, but because he genuinely wanted to know. We dated for 3 years before getting married, a small wedding, modest. My parents cried, his mother critiqued the flowers. Even then, there were signs, but I didn't know how to read them yet. Jason always had big dreams, bigger than his paychecks, bigger than our apartment, bigger than reality sometimes. He wanted more, status, recognition, a life that looked impressive from the outside. I didn't mind ambition. I just believed in earning it slowly. For a long time, we balanced each other. The first 5 years of marriage were good. Not perfect, but real. Shared dinners, weekend projects, inside jokes that only make sense when you've been through things together. When Jason switched careers, again, I supported him. When he talked about networking events and connections, I listened. When money got tight, I adjusted, picked up side work, cut back, made it work. I didn't complain. I thought that was love. Lena Moore entered our lives 2 years ago. Jason came home talking about her the way people talk about opportunity. She was smart, connected, in the right rooms. He said she could open doors for him. I met her once at a casual mixer. She shook my hand firmly, looked me up and down quickly, and smiled like she'd already made a decision about me. After that, Jason changed in ways I explained away. He started caring more about appearances, new clothes, new gym routine. He spoke differently, used words he'd never used before. Leverage, positioning, optics. He was suddenly busy. Late nights, weekend meetings, conferences out of town. And me? I became background noise. I noticed the distance, of course. The way his phone never left his side. The way he turned the screen away when I entered a room. The way affection became something scheduled instead of spontaneous. But I also noticed my own silence. I told myself marriages go through phases. I told myself stress makes people act strange. I told myself that trust meant not interrogating every unexplained hour. His family didn't help. His mother hinted that I didn't push him enough. His sister joked that I was too comfortable with simple things. No one said it outright, but the message was clear. Jason was outgrowing me, and I let that idea live in my head. So when he told me about the Chicago conference, I packed his suitcase without question, folded his shirts, slipped in his favorite socks, kissed him goodbye like a woman who still believed she was standing on solid ground. I didn't know I was already standing on a fault line. Looking back now, the signs were everywhere. I just chose love over clarity, and sometimes that's the most dangerous choice of all. After Jason's conference began, the house felt wrong in a way I couldn't describe to anyone without sounding paranoid. It wasn't just that he was gone. It was the absence of him being gone, the way his presence still lingered in tiny, unsettling details. His cologne on the hallway air, his coffee mug still in the sink like he'd left in a rush, the laundry basket half full, as if he'd started packing, then decided I'd finish it. I tried to stay busy. I always did. I took extra hours at work. I ran errands. I cleaned the kitchen twice in one night just to hear the sound of something being handled, controlled, put back where it belonged. And then the texts started. At first, they were normal. Flight landed, busy day, dinner with colleagues. But there was something off about them. Too polished, too spaced out. Like someone was sending updates because it was required, not because they wanted to share their life with me. I'd reply with small things. How was it? Did you eat? Call me when you can. He never called. I told myself he was exhausted. Then, on the second night, I noticed he stopped using my nickname. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But intimacy isn't one big thing. It's hundreds of tiny habits stacked together. When one disappears, you feel the gap. The third night, I got a message at 11:12 p.m. Heading to bed, long day, I stared at the screen. Jason never went to bed that early when he traveled. He always wanted to unwind, watch TV, scroll, complain about the hotel pillows. He'd usually call me and talk nonsense until I yawned first. I set my phone down and tried to sleep. I couldn't. Somewhere around midnight, I walked into our bedroom and stood in front of the closet. I don't know why, I just looked. The space where his suit jackets hung felt too neat, like someone had carefully curated what was missing. That's when I saw it. His gray blazer, the one he always wore to events, was still there. My throat tightened. If he was at a professional conference, why would he leave behind the blazer he wore to every single important occasion? I sat on the edge of the bed, palms pressed into the mattress, and tried to reason with myself. Maybe he packed a different one. Maybe he didn't need it. Maybe. But that word maybe was starting to feel like a rope around my neck. The next morning, his mother called, not to ask how I was, to ask where Jason was. Chicago, I said, trying to sound casual. A pause. She replied, the way people do when they're filing information away. He didn't mention Chicago to me. My stomach dropped. He's been busy, I said quickly. It was last minute. He used to call me before traveling, she said, like it was an accusation. But lately he's distant. And just like that, I wasn't just a wife with a gut feeling anymore. I was a woman seeing cracks in a wall everyone else pretended was fine. That afternoon, I ran into Jason's sister at the grocery store. She smiled brightly and then, too casually, asked, "So, how's Jason's little real estate thing going? He's still seeing that Lena woman a lot?" The way she said Lena woman made my hands go cold on the shopping cart. "They're networking," I said. She shrugged. "Sure, whatever you want to call it." Then she walked away. I stood there between the cereal aisle and the frozen foods, my heart pounding, and I realized something. I wasn't imagining it. The people closest to him were seeing it too, and I was the last one still trying to protect the story. By the time Tuesday night came around, the night of the sushi delivery, I wasn't walking into that condo blind. I was walking into it carrying every ignored sign, like a weight in my arms. The elevator ride up to the 12th floor felt longer than it should have. Every number that lit up above the doors thudded inside my chest like a warning. I stood there holding the paper bag from Sakura Sushi, the warmth seeping into my palms, the smell of soy sauce and wasabi suddenly nauseating. My reflection stared back at me from the mirrored walls, tired eyes, hair pulled into a practical knot, a woman dressed for work, not for heartbreak. I told myself to breathe. I told myself there could still be an explanation. The elevator chimed. 12. I stepped out into a quiet hallway lined with soft lighting and abstract art. Expensive, impersonal, the kind of place that tried too hard to feel calm. Unit 12A was at the end. I stopped in front of the door. For a brief, cowardly second, I considered turning around, leaving the bag at the desk, driving home and pretending none of this had happened. But something inside me had already crossed a line. I knocked. Footsteps approached from inside, unhurried, familiar. The door opened. Jason stood there, staring at me like I was a ghost. His face drained of color so fast it was almost impressive. "Natalie?" His voice cracked. "What are you doing here?" I looked at him. Really looked. Barefoot. Hair damp, like he'd just run his hands through it too many times. He was wearing a button-down shirt, dark blue, tailored, expensive. Not one I'd ever seen before. I lifted the bag slightly. "Delivery for Jason Harper," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Uber Eats." For half a second, he didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there blocking the doorway, eyes flicking behind him like he was calculating something. Then I heard another sound. Laughter. Soft. Female. And before I could stop myself, my gaze slid past his shoulder. Lena Moore stood in the living room. She was barefoot too, wrapped in a silk robe, hair loose around her shoulders, holding a wine glass like she belonged there, like this was her space, her night, her man. Our eyes met. Her smile faltered. "Oh," she said quietly, "this must be Natalie." That was it. That was the moment. Something inside me snapped. Not explosively, not dramatically, but cleanly, like a thread pulled too tight finally giving way. "So," I said, stepping forward and setting the sushi bag down on the hallway floor between us, "this is Chicago now?" Jason reached for my arm. "Natalie, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" I asked, pulling back. "That you're not out of town? That you're here, wearing someone else's clothes, ordering dinner under our shared account?" Lena shifted uncomfortably. "Jason told me you two were separated." I laughed. A short, hollow sound that didn't feel like it came from me. "Of course he did." Jason's voice rose, panicked. "That's not what I said. Things have been complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated. "I packed your suitcase 3 days ago. I kissed you goodbye in our kitchen. That wasn't complicated. That was a lie." I turned and walked back down the hallway. My legs were shaking, but they moved. In the parking garage, I opened the trunk of my car. Jason's suitcase sat exactly where I'd left it. I dragged it out, rolled it back toward the elevator, and returned to Unit 12A. They were both still there, frozen. I set the suitcase down at Jason's feet. "Here," I said calmly, "your things, since you're clearly staying." Jason's eyes filled with tears. Natalie, don't do this. We can talk. We can fix this. I looked at him, the man I'd loved, the man who had chosen deception over honesty, and felt something strange. Relief. We're done talking, I said. You made your choice. Now you get to live with it. Lena didn't say a word. She just watched, lips pressed together, as if already realizing that whatever fantasies she'd bought into came with consequences she hadn't priced out. I turned and walked away. Behind me, the doors stayed open. No one followed. As I drove out of the garage, I caught a glimpse of them in my rearview mirror. Jason sagging against the wall, Lena's hand hovering uselessly near his arm. For the first time in months, I smiled. The delivery was complete, and something far more painful and far more necessary had just begun. I didn't go home right away. I drove. No destination, no plan, just empty streets and red lights that blurred together as my hands stayed locked around the steering wheel, like it was the only solid thing left in my world. My chest felt tight, not like panic, but like something heavy had finally settled where it belonged. Shock is quiet. That was the first thing I noticed. There was no screaming, no sobbing, no dramatic collapse. Just a strange stillness, like my body had decided to conserve energy for something worse that hadn't arrived yet. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the sky had gone fully dark. Our house looked the same as it had that morning. Porch light on, curtains drawn, the kind of place that used to feel safe. Now it felt like a stage set after the actors had left. Inside, the silence pressed in on me. I set my keys down carefully, took off my shoes. Habit. Muscle memory. The refrigerator hummed. The clock in the hallway ticked too loudly. Everything kept moving forward as if nothing had happened. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the wood grain until my eyes burned. 8 years. 8 years of partnership, compromise, trust. I thought about every time I'd defended Jason to my friends, every time I'd told myself I was being insecure, every time I'd lowered my own expectations so his could stay inflated. And the worst part, I didn't just feel betrayed, I felt embarrassed. Embarrassed that other people had seen it before I did. Embarrassed that I'd helped maintain the illusion. Embarrassed that I'd loved someone who could look me in the eye and lie without flinching. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. Jason. I let it ring. It buzzed again. Then again. Finally, a text. Please, just talk to me. I typed. Deleted. Typed again. Then I put the phone face down and stood up. I walked through the house slowly, noticing things I'd ignored for years. The extra space he'd taken over. The half-finished projects. The framed photo of us on the hallway wall, smiling, unaware, or maybe just pretending. In the bedroom, I opened the closet. Half of it was empty now. I sat on the edge of the bed and let myself feel it then. Not rage, not despair. Grief. For the marriage I thought I had. For the woman I'd been inside it. For the future I'd planned without knowing I was planning alone. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. The decision was already made. I called in sick to work. Then I called Daniel Foster, my lawyer, a friend from college who'd once joked that if I ever needed him professionally, something had gone very wrong. Natalie Harper, he said when he answered. Please tell me this isn't about you punching someone. Worse, I replied. I need a divorce attorney. He didn't joke after that. I told him everything. The delivery, the condo, Lena, the lies. He listened. When I finished, he said, okay, first rule, don't do anything impulsive. Second, document everything. Third, we protect you legally, not emotionally. What about the house? I asked. You bought it before the marriage, he said. That matters. We'll handle the rest carefully. After the call, I changed the locks. Not out of spite, out of necessity. I left Jason a written notice. Clear, legal, calm. Then I called Marissa, my closest friend, and told her the truth in a voice that didn't shake anymore. I'm proud of you, she said softly, even if it hurts. That afternoon, Jason showed up. He stood on the porch, knocking like he was afraid to wake someone else's life. When I opened the door, he looked smaller, older. We need to talk, he said. I met his eyes. We already did. Tears welled up. I made a mistake. No, I replied. You made a choice. There's a difference. He didn't argue after that. He just stood there, realizing for the first time that consequences aren't loud. They're final. And as I closed the door, my hands steady, my heart still aching, but intact, I understood something vital. I was done reacting. The next step wouldn't be about survival. It would be about transformation. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It came in waves, phone calls, half-truths, people suddenly feeling entitled to an opinion about a marriage they hadn't lived inside. 2 days after I changed the locks, Jason's mother called. I watched her name light up on my screen and felt a familiar tightening in my chest. For years, I'd tried to earn her approval. Cooked the meals she liked, bit my tongue when she criticized my career, my clothes, my lack of ambition. I answered out of habit more than hope. Natalie, she said sharply, skipping any pretense. What is going on? You should ask your son, I replied calmly. He says you're overreacting, she snapped, that this is a misunderstanding. I closed my eyes for a moment. He was living with another woman while telling me he was out of town. Silence. Then a sigh. Not of shock, but of inconvenience. Well, she said slowly, men make mistakes. Marriage isn't something you throw away over one bad decision. I felt something harden inside me. One bad decision is forgetting an anniversary, I said. This was months of lying. You weren't always easy to live with, she countered. You focused so much on work. Maybe he felt neglected. There it was. The familiar pivot. The subtle shifting of blame. I worked to support our life, I said evenly, including the one he was living behind my back. She scoffed. You're being dramatic. Jason is embarrassed. You're humiliating him by freezing accounts and involving lawyers. I almost laughed. I'm protecting myself, I said. You're welcome to call it whatever makes you comfortable. She hung up on me. That afternoon, Lena Moore tried to call. I didn't answer. She texted instead. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Jason told me you two were already emotionally separated. I didn't know. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. He lied to both of us. The difference is, I'm not interested in comparing notes. No response after that. The next escalation came from Jason's friends. Men I'd cooked for, laughed with, trusted. Suddenly, they were mediators. One sent a long message about forgiveness. Another suggested counseling. One even implied that if I'd been more supportive, Jason wouldn't have strayed. I didn't respond. Silence, I learned quickly, is a boundary. But the real escalation came when Jason showed up again, this time with an agenda. He knocked mid-morning while I was on a work call. When I opened the door, he wasn't alone. His sister stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes sharp. We need to talk, she said, stepping forward like she owned the space. No, I replied. You don't. Jason tried to smile, tried to soften his voice. Nat, please. We just want to clear some things up. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. Say what you need to say, I said. Here. His sister didn't waste time. You're being vindictive, freezing accounts, changing locks, filing papers without warning. It's extreme. I gave legal notice, I replied. And warning doesn't apply when someone lies for months. Jason looked at the ground. I didn't mean for it to get this far. And yet, I said, you kept going. He looked up. I was confused. No, I corrected. You were comfortable. That hit harder than anything else I'd said. His sister scoffed. So what? You're just going to ruin his life now? I met her gaze. I didn't ruin anything. I stopped cushioning him from reality. She shook her head. You think you're so righteous. No, I said quietly. I think I'm done sacrificing myself to protect your family's image. Jason reached for my hand. I stepped back. I've already spoken to my lawyer, I continued. So have you, apparently. Any further communication goes through them. His face fell. You're really doing this? Yes, I said, I am. They left without another word. That night, I sat alone in the living room, lights off, letting the weight of everything settle. I wasn't numb anymore, I wasn't even angry. I was clear. Jason hadn't just betrayed me. He'd underestimated me. He'd assumed I'd bend, that I'd negotiate my dignity in exchange for familiarity, that I'd choose comfort over truth. He was wrong. As I poured myself a glass of water and stared out the window at a city that kept moving, I felt something shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. This wasn't just a marriage ending. This was the beginning of me stepping out of a role I'd been shrinking inside for years. And I knew, without hesitation, that the hardest part was still coming. The lowest point didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It came quietly on a Sunday afternoon when the house was too still and I realized I had nowhere to be and no one to answer to. No distraction left to outrun the truth. I sat on the living room floor with my back against the couch, surrounded by boxes Jason hadn't taken yet. Things he'd forgotten, things he hadn't cared enough to claim. Old tools, a jacket I'd bought him years ago, a mug that said "World's Okayest Husband," a joke that landed differently now. That was when it hit me. Not the betrayal. I'd already processed that. The loneliness. I'd spent years being someone's anchor, someone's safety net, someone's quiet support system. And suddenly, all that energy had nowhere to go. It turned inward, heavy and unforgiving. I wondered, briefly, dangerously, if his family was right, if I'd been too rigid, too focused, too independent, if I'd mistaken self-respect for distance. The thoughts crept in like fog. Maybe if I'd dressed differently. Maybe if I'd laughed more at his jokes. Maybe if I'd needed him more. I hated myself for even thinking it. That night, I dreamed of the condo hallway again. The way the light reflected off the floor, the sound of laughter I wasn't meant to hear. I woke up gasping, heart racing, sheets twisted around my legs like restraints. The next morning, I couldn't get out of bed. I stared at the ceiling and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Powerless. Work emails piled up unanswered. Messages from friends went unread. Even Marissa's voice felt too far away, like it belonged to someone else's life. I wasn't suicidal, but I was tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. I finally stood up near noon, shuffled to the bathroom, and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were dull, my shoulders slumped. The woman staring back at me looked older, not in years, but in hope. "I didn't deserve this," I whispered. Saying it out loud cracked something open. I slid down the wall and cried then. Not pretty tears, not cinematic grief, just raw, messy sobs that shook my ribs and left my throat burning. I cried for the marriage, for the years, for the version of me who thought love meant endurance. When the tears finally slowed, I stayed there on the floor, exhausted. That's when my phone buzzed. A text from Jason. "I never meant to hurt you. I still love you." I stared at the words until they blurred. Love. The audacity of it. I typed back before I could overthink it. Love doesn't require deception. There was no reply. That silence, his silence, was the final cut. Because in that moment, I realized something devastating and liberating at the same time. He wasn't fighting for me. He was fighting for the comfort I provided. And once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. I spent the rest of the day in a haze. I didn't eat, didn't turn on the TV, just moved from room to room like a guest in my own life, touching the walls, the furniture, the spaces we'd shared, deciding what stayed and what went. By evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and wrote 2 lists. What I lost, what I ignored. The second list was longer. That's when the darkness started to lift. Not because things were better, but because they were clearer. I wasn't broken. I was grieving. And grief, I reminded myself, is not a weakness. It's the price of having loved honestly. As night fell, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would stop asking why he chose her. I would start asking why I stayed as long as I did. The answers weren't comfortable, but they were mine. And somewhere in that uncomfortable truth, a spark flickered. Not hope, not yet, but resolve. The turning point didn't arrive like a thunderclap. It arrived on a Wednesday morning, wrapped in an envelope I almost didn't open. It was from Daniel, my lawyer. Routine, I thought. Another update, Another step in the slow dismantling of a life I'd outgrown without realizing it. I made coffee first. Black. Strong. The kind I drank when I needed my mind sharp and my emotions quiet. Then I opened the envelope. Inside were copies of financial disclosures Jason had submitted. Documents meant to prove transparency. Income, assets, debts, all neatly typed, all technically complete, and all wrong. Not wildly wrong. Not sloppy enough to scream fraud. Just off. Small omissions. Numbers that didn't align with past statements. A consulting fee here. A loan repayment there. Enough to raise questions. Enough to suggest someone was trying to shape a narrative instead of tell the truth. My chest tightened, not with fear, but recognition. This wasn't new behavior. This was who he'd always been when things got uncomfortable. Daniel called an hour later. "I wanted to talk before you saw everything," he said carefully. "There are inconsistencies. Nothing illegal yet, but enough that opposing counsel is pushing for mediation instead of discovery." "Mediation benefits who?" I asked. "Usually the person with more to hide." I closed my eyes. "So he's still lying," I said. "Yes," Daniel replied, "just more carefully." After the call, I sat at the kitchen table and felt something settle into place. Not anger, not vindication, clarity. Jason wasn't remorseful. He was strategic. That afternoon, I met Marissa for coffee, the first time I'd left the house for something that wasn't an obligation. She watched me quietly as I spoke, nodding, letting me find my own way through the words. "You're not surprised," she said finally. "No," I admitted. "I'm relieved." She tilted her head. "Relieved?" "That I stopped before this became my whole life," I said. "Before I lost myself trying to save something that never wanted saving." She smiled softly. There she is. Later that evening, a different message came through. From Lena. I almost ignored it. Almost. "I think Jason has been lying to me too. I didn't know he was still financially tied to you the way he is. I'm sorry." I read it twice. Then I typed back, "I believe you, and I'm done being the person he lies through." No anger, no lecture, just truth. She didn't respond. She didn't need to, because something important had shifted. For the first time since this all began, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. That night, I went through the house and packed away the last of Jason's things, not with bitterness, but with intention. I boxed them neatly, labeled them clearly, set them by the door for pickup. When I finished, the house felt different, lighter, like it had been waiting for me to decide. The next morning, I called Daniel. "I don't want mediation," I said. "I want this clean, transparent, final." There was a pause. "Are you sure?" he asked. "It might get uncomfortable." "I'm done being comfortable," I replied. "I want the truth on record." Another pause. Then, "Okay, then we proceed." After I hung up, I stood in the doorway of my home and let myself breathe deeply. Really breathe, for the first time in weeks. I hadn't won anything yet, but I'd reclaimed something far more important, my agency. I wasn't the woman who needed to be chosen anymore. I was the woman doing the choosing, and that changed everything. The truth doesn't explode, it collapses. That was the lesson Jason learned, slowly, painfully, over the weeks that followed. Once my lawyer pushed for full financial discovery, the tone on the other side changed. Emails that had once been sharp grew cautious. Deadlines were suddenly flexible. Requests for extensions multiplied. The confidence Jason had worn like armor began to crack. People noticed cracks, especially the kind that spread quietly. His colleagues started asking questions. Nothing dramatic, just careful pauses during meetings, sidelong looks when finances came up, invitations that stopped arriving. When someone's personal life starts bleeding into their professional one, it stains everything. Lena disappeared first. Not dramatically, not publicly. She simply stopped showing up. Jason tried to frame it as space, then as mutual understanding, then not at all. Her name vanished from conversations the same way she'd entered his life, efficiently, without emotional cleanup. I didn't ask about her. I didn't need to. What mattered was watching the support system he'd assumed would hold him evaporate. His mother called once more. This time her voice was different, less sharp, more careful. "Natalie," she said, "Jason is having a hard time." I leaned against the kitchen counter, phone pressed to my ear, and felt nothing. "I'm sure he is," I replied. He didn't realize how serious this would become. I closed my eyes. "That's usually how consequences work," I said. She sighed. "You don't have to destroy him." "I'm not," I answered calmly. I stopped protecting him. Silence stretched between us. Then quietly, "He's embarrassed." That word again, not remorse, not accountability, embarrassment. "I hope he learns from it," I said. I had to. After that, the calls stopped. Jason didn't fight the divorce, not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't afford to. The evidence stacked up neatly. The timeline spoke for itself. The inconsistencies he'd tried to smooth over became liabilities once exposed to light. He signed. No contest. No dramatics. No last-minute speeches. When I received the final paperwork, I sat at the same kitchen table where I'd once questioned my worth and signed my name with a steady hand. The house remained mine, not just legally, emotionally. Jason came once to collect the last of his things. I wasn't home. I'd arranged it that way. When I returned, the space felt complete. Not empty, not hollow. Just finished. Word traveled, as it always does. Friends who'd once hovered uncertainly reached out. Some apologized. Some stayed silent. I learned who valued integrity over convenience. And Jason, he faded. Not dramatically, not tragically, just quietly out of rooms he no longer belonged in. The man who'd once thought he could rewrite the story walked away without the audience he'd assumed would clap. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I moved on. Because by then, I understood something fundamental. Justice isn't loud. It's proportional. And the most powerful thing I'd done wasn't exposing him. It was walking away without dragging his lies behind me. I didn't need revenge. The truth had already done its work. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I realized something had changed. Not suddenly, not ceremonially, but unmistakably. I woke up one morning and the silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. The house no longer echoed with absence. It held my routines, my breath, my choices. I rearranged the furniture, not to erase the past, but to reclaim the space. I painted the bedroom a color Jason used to call too bold. I slept diagonally across the bed. I laughed out loud when I wanted to. I didn't rush into anything new. I didn't need to. Healing, I learned, isn't about replacing what you lost. It's about returning to who you were before you started shrinking to fit someone else's expectations. People asked if I was bitter. I wasn't. Bitterness requires attachment, and I'd let go. What I carried instead was clarity. I understood now that love without respect is just endurance dressed up as virtue. That loyalty doesn't mean silence. That being understanding should never come at the cost of self-trust. Jason's life continued somewhere beyond my concern. I heard fragments, job changes, relocations, explanations that never quite matched the outcome. None of it stirred anything in me, because closure doesn't come from watching someone else suffer. It comes from no longer needing to look. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and the windows open to the city, I caught my reflection in the darkened glass. I looked grounded, not hardened, not cynical, whole. I didn't win because he lost. I won because I chose myself without apology. And if there's one thing I'd tell anyone listening, any woman quietly questioning her reality, minimizing her instincts, waiting for proof loud enough to justify leaving, it's this. You don't need permission to honor the truth you already feel. You don't need a dramatic ending to walk away. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop protecting someone from the consequences of their own choices and start protecting your own future instead. The delivery was completed. The chapter closed. And for the first time in a long while, the story ahead belonged entirely to me.